Hey everybody, Dr. Ray, and in this video, I'm going to talk about becoming an ID as a teacher. So as you know, if you watch a lot of my other videos, I teach in an instructional design program, and I'm also a consultant, so I do both. But I work with tons of teachers. I would say probably 60 to 80% of my students throughout the last 12 years have been teachers transitioning into ID. I'm going to talk to you about their experiences, things that I've seen, things that I know, things that I watch happen with them, and kind of all that stuff. So the first thing you ask yourself is, if you're a teacher, why are you becoming an instructional designer? The reasons that I see my students do it, the biggest reason is better pay. That's in the state of North Carolina where I live. Pay is significantly different as an instructional designer. Your salary pretty much doubles starting. So that's a pretty big deal for people, because people do like to have enough money to actually live somewhere. You know, they like a house and car and stuff. You know, the basic necessities of life. So that's one of the reasons. Next, sometimes people just realize they'd rather be around adults. They don't really want to be in K-12 schools. They really want to be teaching adults or in the field of training rather than working with kids. So they decided to leave teaching for that reason. The next reason is that corporate work has become much more flexible. You could find many online jobs in the ID field before COVID, but after COVID, it's just like significantly increased, and it's probably going to stay that way. So, you know, people used to say, well, teachers have their summer off. Well, now it's much more flexible to be in a corporate space for a lot of companies. Not every job by far, but a lot of them. You know, you can find those online jobs much easier. So those are some of the reasons why teachers end up leaving teaching. I've seen teachers leave after 1 year. I've seen teachers leave after like 17 to 20 years, which is a lot, but yeah, they do, and they're very successful. So let's talk about, you know, transitioning, some of those things that I've witnessed, some of the things that I advise them, and as I watch them grow a career, the things that I've noticed, and my experience hiring teachers as well. Okay, so the first thing, you know, after I talk about why, you know, you talk about one of the things that a lot of teachers come to me asking is, well, I have a teaching degree, so is that the same as instructional design? And the first thing I have to say is that there are many different types of instructional design. Means a lot of different things out there in the field. You know, I can tell you what I think it means, but like company A, company B, and company C might all have be hiring an instructional designer and all have a pretty significantly different job application. So what do you mean when you say that teaching is like being an instructional designer? In that, if your goal is to go out and teach adults, yeah, you have teaching experience. But if your goal is to like go and start designing e-learning, that you haven't been taught that as a teacher. In fact, most teacher prep programs, they cover ID about, like, let's say that if ID is if there's 100% of ID, most teacher prep programs probably cover like 2 to 10% of what I would expect an instructional designer to know. Most teachers are not prepared to be instructional designers without some kind of training, because they don't really have the lingo. They don't have the language. They don't have the tech skills. They don't know the processes. They don't know the differences between the two, which is one of the reasons why they're confused about, are the two the same thing? Let me just give you an example. So it would be like taking let's say a teacher is an Uber driver. Let's compare the teaching field to Uber drivers. It'd be like asking an Uber driver, just say, hey, I need you to drive this NASCAR car around this track at 200 miles today. That's kind of the difference between being an ID and a teacher. It's just a big jump. It'd be like, you know, taking like your cardiac heart echo scans to the podiatrist or dentist and being like, can you analyze these for me? And that's not what they do. They're just very different jobs. Yes, there are tons of things between teaching and ID that are very similar, but there are also lots of things that are different. Just like that NASCAR, you know, race car and Uber driver, like, yes, they're both driving cars, but very different purposes, very different types of cars. It's just a big difference. So there's a big difference between the two fields. Yes. And just to give you an example, I teach an assessment course every summer, and this is a course that one would assume teachers would be the best at and know everything about an assessment course. But let's say I've been teaching that course for 10 years now. I would say every single year that I teach the course, I probably have between 3 and 7 teachers send me a private message and say, Dr. Pastor, I'm embarrassed to say this, but as a teacher, I never knew any of the stuff that you've been teaching in this assessment course. I can't believe that we didn't know it, and this should be a mandatory course for K-12 educators. And I say, and these are teachers from all across different education programs. And I say, yeah, it's one of those things that is a nice to have for teachers, but teacher prep programs are already packed. They can't just keep adding and adding and adding, so they've had to cut. There's certain things they just can't cover. So there are things that you learn. That's just one example class that I teach where I notice that a lot. Okay, so that's the kind of the difference between teaching and being an ID. Just 2 different things, that's all. It's like if I'm an instructional designer, I can't just go like be a K-12 teacher. I get like the licensing thing, but like there's things you need to know, right? Okay, next question. Do hiring managers like teachers? What do I find? Well, I've heard from hiring managers that do and do not prefer teachers. But I would say that, so the majority of hiring managers, the majority of people out there, they want you just to be able to do the job. They want you to be able to do the job that they're hiring for. If your background's a teacher, great. If it's not, great. It doesn't matter. So that's the majority. I've also talked to a few hiring managers that prefer teachers. They love when someone has that classroom experience and has managed a classroom. I've also talked to a few hiring managers that said they don't prefer hiring teachers as well. So it's a mixed bag, but overall, the majority, it doesn't matter. Okay, let's talk about the degree and then like, you get it? Let's talk about reasons you don't need it and reasons you do need it. So let's start out with the master's degree. So the gold standard in our field is a master's degree. There are certificates and other things out there, but the gold standard is a degree. So let's talk about if you decide not to get a degree. Can you get a job? The answer is right now, yes. And that's the key word that I just said, right now. We'll get into that in a second. There's a huge demand for instructional designers. We don't have enough people to fill all the roles. That is slowly changing as more people enter the field, and that'll change and it'll become a lot. And it is in some areas where you live. It might be super competitive already. In some areas it's not. So it all depends on where you live. But yes, you can get a job as an instructional designer. If you have the knowledge to pass the interview and some kind of portfolio, you can get a job as an instructional designer. But, and this is a big but, and I'll go back to that race car example. A lot of training out there is really bad. Oh my God, when I take training, I'd say 90% of the time, it's so bad. I can't believe someone put it together. There's a lot of bad training out there. And the next problem is that most people have only taken bad training because there's so much of it out there that's what they think training is. That's what they think good training is. So they don't know the difference. They don't know what they don't know. It's become normal. We've normalized bad training. So that would be like, look, I could jump into a NASCAR race car and race it around the track going like 10 miles an hour right now. But like, and if that's all everyone did, just go 10 miles an hour, like we would think that was really good. Like, I'm doing my job. I got in this car and I'm driving it around the track and everyone's like, good job, you're driving it, you did it. But like, no, like the pros go like 150, I'm making up, like 150 miles per hour or whatever. So like, there's a big difference between doing something good and being able to do something. So what I find is that there's a lot of people I meet, I interview these people in the field all the time that have never been trained to be an instructional designer. And even some people that went to programs that weren't good, I go out and interview them for my consulting firm and they can't, I can tell within literally 3 to 5 minutes if you know the field or not by asking you certain questions. I can just tell if you can design. I don't need to see a portfolio. I don't need to see anything you've ever developed. I can tell by talking to you in just a few minutes. We don't need a 30-minute interview. I can tell in minutes, less than the minute numerals on my hand, for less than 5 minutes if you know the field, you know your stuff or not. I can tell if you're a good designer. Then I can start getting into the nuts and bolts, like can you develop, what kind of strategies do you use, all that good stuff. But I can tell right away. All right, so yes, you can get a job without the master's degree at certain places. Keep in mind that like certain places like K-12, higher ed, and most military, government, and some corporate jobs will not hire people without a master's. It's kind of like we can have this requirement. But yes, you can get a job, and some of the big companies are hiring people without the degree. So, okay, having said that, let's talk about with the master's, reasons why someone will get it. So first of all, there's better pay. The most recent study that has come out, I believe it was e-learning guilds, found that people with a master's degree on average made $3,000 more per year in their salary who had the degree versus not. So that's a pretty significant difference when you add that up over time. And the biggest, what I find is that many of the people, because there are a lot of people out there will say, like, you don't need a degree, just go get a job. But most of those people making that recommendation were not in the field when the economy tanked in 2008 to 2010 or 11. They weren't there. They didn't get into the field until after that. So I run into this problem with people in the stock market and housing market too. And let me use that example and go from there. We'll talk about that example and then get to ID. So what happened is, I'm on like lots of financial forums. I love stocks. If you look at my channel, you'll see a couple like financial things, like I love investing and everything. I see lots of people jump onto the investing forums and they're like, hey, I've been investing since 2016. Warren Buffett says that most, brokerage firms can't beat the S&P 500. Well, I've been investing since 2016 and I beat it every year. I'm thinking about becoming a stockbroker. And generally the consensus out there is, yes, every person has beat the market since 2016 because the economy's been doing so well. In fact, I just saw something on one of the, I guess it was MSNBC, where they had a dog pick like 10 stocks out of 100 and to see if the dog could like do better than the S&P 500. And it was like the dog was doing fine. Because the economy's doing really well, everything's a lot easier than it typically has been. So what happened in 2008, and what a lot of people tell these wannabe stockbrokers is, let's see if you can beat the S&P 500 when the economy tanks. When there is a bear market, when the economy goes down, let's see if you can do well. Because that's the real sign of success. Like if I started a company right now, we were doing really great, like that's awesome. But as soon as the economy tanks, my company does too. I didn't have staying power. Instructional design is very similar. So when the economy tanked in 2008 to like 2010, all of a sudden there was no such thing as jobs. Like especially in corporate America, like there were no jobs for months and years, a few years, like none, like literally not like one, like none. But in our field, fortunately, we are able to, work outside of just corporate America. We are able to go into government, tons of government contracting out there, tons of higher ed institutions that were hiring instructional designers at the time. But every one of those places required the master's degree. So if you go into the field and you go into the field without the degree and the economy takes a nosedive, first of all, like trainers, quality people, anyone not making money you're the first one to get cut. And you finding a job out there, you're not going to be able to jump to those other fields because you didn't have the degree. So that makes it a little tricky. You don't have the staying power. The next thing is what's going to separate you on your resume. Let's assume that you and the person next to you each have 5 years of experience. You both have a good portfolio. Listen, every person I can teach my 11-year-old son to create a really nice portfolio. Everyone has a good portfolio. You all have work experience. Is there anything that separates you? It's the little things that start to matter. Okay. And when I can do that, when I can separate people, I start separating. The first thing I separate them by is degree. And then I go from there to the rest of the resume and look at everything else. Okay. So I want to bring that up because it's very big important that we are in a bull market. Economy's good. Things are a lot easier than they will be when the economy takes a turn. So just remember that. All right. So what's my overall advice for someone going into the field? Teacher interested in getting into the instructional design field. So my overall advice is, first, congrats. That's awesome that you want to get into the field. It's cool. It's a really good field. I've had lots of success in instructional design. I really like the field. I've seen tons of teachers do extremely well and just love their job and career. So that's the first thing I'll say to them, my overall advice. Next thing, I'll tell you, hands down, go get a master's degree. And like my master's degree costs less than $10,000. That's like nothing. We're talking about like, so you're going to make $3,000 a year and the degree only costs, we're talking about like a 3-year return on it, like 3 year of salary return on investment from getting the master's. And then you're going to go work 30 years. Yeah, it's worth it. So the ROI is there. That's just return on investment, like financially. It's only like 10 grand. That's in my state, in my school. All schools are different. You got to look, but they're really cheap. They're not like $70,000 master's degrees like an MBA or $200,000 like an MBA. So it's the return on investment is there. So that's the biggest thing about it is that the return on, and then it helps you secure where you are in the field if the economy takes a downturn. My overall advice is to also get an internship or 2 or 3. I've had students get many internships, like 3 to 5, but you really just need one solid, good internship that gives you the experience, the degree, internship, huge things that you got to do. And during your master's, you'll like build a portfolio and stuff like that. My other piece of advice is see where you fit into the field. As I said in the beginning, like there are multiple like jobs you could potentially do as an instructor. Like you could be an e-learning, like an e-learning developer. You could be doing like front end analysis. You could be doing like all of that kind of stuff. But I don't know, maybe you fit into one area or another, and some people do. So find out where you fit in so you can apply to the right jobs that you think you're going to get and do well in. So good luck. Congrats on taking a step and trying to move forward in your career. I think that's always awesome, and I hope you do well. Later, everybody.